The quarterly board meeting was built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So why do so many boards still run on it? Today, we're asking whether that once a quarter cadence is now a governance risk in itself, quietly letting boards fall behind the pace of the businesses they oversee. My final guest, Amy Shenkan, director of EverCommerce and Ring Central, has studied how private equity boards operate on a completely different rhythm and believes public boards can borrow from it without tipping into micromanagement. So where's the line between staying nimble in a world of AI disruption and cyber threats and just reacting to noise? Amy, you've argued that the traditional quarterly board meeting may no longer match the speed of today's business environment. What are the biggest governance risks created by a board cadence that was designed for a slower era? And where are boards most likely to fall behind management today?
To put a finer point on it, governance needs a new cadence. The board's job hasn't changed. The operating environment has definitely changed. Quarterly board meetings cannot be the primary operating system of governance today. I'd say this isn't a result just of AI, but I do think that AI may have presented a tipping point to a governance model that was already under strain. So 40 years ago, information moved more slowly and most industries moved more slowly, and quarterly oversight made sense because management had the time to gather information and analyze it and present it and do something about it. But today the world moves in weeks and sometimes days, and AI capabilities evolve monthly or weekly, and cyber threats emerge overnight, and geopolitical events can disrupt supply chains rapidly. Consumer changes are happening faster than traditional planning cycle, et cetera, et cetera. So management teams are living in that reality every day, while boards often see a carefully packaged snapshot every 3 months. So getting to your precise question, I think this creates several governance risks. One is something I'd call information asymmetry widening, which is that management inevitably becomes much closer to the operating reality than directors, and directors cannot as effectively discharge their oversight duties if that information asymmetry exists. The second risk is that the boards become or can become more reactive instead of proactive or even anticipatory. And so instead of helping to shape decisions, they end up reviewing decisions that have effectively already been made. And third, I'd say that strategy and risk can become disconnected. AI, cybersecurity, regulation, talent, geopolitics, these are no longer periodic agenda items. They're continuous strategic variables. And so I think part of the irony is the boards don't need more information. They need more continuous information and situational awareness. So the quarterly board meetings become decision forums rather than backward-looking information download sessions. Of course, this last point was and always will be good governance practice.
Private equity-backed companies often operate with far more frequent interaction between boards and management around value creation and transformation. Which elements of that model do you think public company boards can realistically adopt without crossing into micromanagement?
Yeah, great question. I think private equity has some structural advantages. The ownership is concentrated, the objectives and timeframes are more clear. Boards tend to be more engaged in execution and on a continuous basis. And I don't think that public companies want to operate that way, but there probably are a couple habits that are worth borrowing. And I'd say the first is cadence. Instead of interacting primarily every quarter, public company boards could add shorter touch points between meetings, focus conversations around a handful of strategic issues rather than full board books. I think the second thing to borrow from PE is clarity around value creation. So private equity company boards tend to know and focus on exactly which are the 5 or 6 initiatives that will determine enterprise value over the next couple of years. That's just how the theses are built and how the businesses are run. And public boards sometimes spend too much time reviewing yesterday's performance instead of spending time pressure testing tomorrow's assumptions. And PE boards also, I think, can have a greater sense of urgency given the defined timeline that encourages that urgency. So I'd say that's the second thing to borrow. And the third is working sessions instead of presentations. So some of the best board conversations happen without PowerPoint, and they involve debating scenarios and assumptions and trade-offs and not reading slides. And so I think the key distinction to remember, true for PE and true for public company boards, is the management owns the decisions, the boards own the oversight, and frequent interaction doesn't need to blur those roles if the conversations stay focused on assumptions, risk, capital allocation, strategic choices, rather than operational execution. And if also the conversations remain centered on the board asking great questions and looking around corners and prompting management to think differently.
One of the tensions here is responsiveness versus stability. In an environment shaped by AI disruption, geopolitical volatility, and cyber threats, how should boards know when a situation calls for rapid engagement and course correction versus resisting the urge to overreact to short-term noise?
I think, Bill, this might be one of the more or most important governance questions today. Boards need to balance a reactionary moves versus responsiveness to a changing environment, and even being anticipatory versus responsive. And we all need to get better at understanding the signal through all of the noise and helping management do the same, as it's often much more difficult for them given where they sit. And so I think about three categories. One is the noise. Noise is daily market fluctuation, social media cycles, competitor announcements. This noise rarely requires a board response or board engagement. Then there's signals, and signals are things like emerging trends and customer adoption shift and technology inflection points and regulatory changes, and they deserve discussion and monitoring. And then I'd say the third category are events that fundamentally alter enterprise risk. And that could be a material AI breakthrough that affects the business model. It could be a major cyber incident. It could be supply chain disruption or capital market dislocation or a CEO succession issue. And those issues require immediate engagement from the board. And one thing, a board could do is agree in advance on these trigger points where that automatically warrant board involvement versus those that don't. And so instead of asking, should we call a meeting, you've already answered the question before a situation arises. And I think the idea here would be that creates discipline without creating reactionary moves. And I'd say good governance really is not about reacting faster. It's really about knowing which events deserve a reaction at all. And this kind of framing might help with those conversations.
If you were redesigning the public company board meeting model from scratch for 2026 instead of 1996, what would it actually look like? Would the answer be more meetings, different formats, standing working sessions on strategy and risk, or something else entirely?
I think this is a interesting and timely and certainly in my head, not a resolved question, but I think I might start by talking about the redesign of the flow of information that boards receive and respond to. So one archetype that I've thought about has 4 layers of information flow. So there's the layer 1, which is providing the board with continuous visibility. So imagine a secure dashboard that shows a handful of metrics that truly matter, not hundreds of KPIs, but perhaps the 10 or 15 leading indicators covering customers, talent, cyber, AI adoption, capital allocation, strategic execution on revenue and margin topics. Everybody sees the same facts and they see them in relative real time. And layer 2 would be short virtual check-ins in between the quarterly board meetings, perhaps 30 to 60 minutes every month focused on a strategic topic that matters, and no board book, no presentations, just conversations. And these are designed to provide input on things that the team thinks are important, but also designed to keep the board current on what's going on with the company. And the third layer could be deeper thematic working sessions. Think about a session on capital allocation, or one on talent, or one on geopolitical risk, or one on AI. And these could be kind of educational, exploratory, and forward-looking, and they're designed to open management and the board's eyes to some of the market signals, again, signals versus noise. And layer 4 would be the more typical quarterly meetings that we have, but in this kind of framework or scenario, these quarterly meetings become more valuable because directors arrive informed. It's part of an ongoing conversation. Instead of spending 6 hours reviewing what happened last quarters, they spend 6 hours deciding what should happen next. So to me, that's the future. It's not necessarily more governance, but it's better governance, and it's governance that matches the speed of the environment while preserving the independence and long-term judgment that boards are uniquely positioned to provide.